So yesterday, college football fans everywhere, and especially Alabama fans, were treated with news that had everybody raising their eyebrows. And quite frankly, in my time of covering college football, I don't know that I can recall a moment quite like this. And of course, we're breaking down the Kadyn Proctor news, as it was announced that former five-star offensive tackle Kadyn Proctor, who announced his intention to transfer from Alabama in January from Alabama to Iowa, has now announced that he intends to transfer from Iowa back to Alabama. And of course, we've got to break it down. But before we can, as always, y'all know the drill. I've got to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. And first and foremost, can you remember a situation like this? And if you can, be sure to drop it down in the comments. I would love to dive into some of the crazier happenings in college football. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And normally in these type of videos, I always begin with who is Kadyn Proctor, but given the circumstances, I think that that's already a foregone conclusion. I think college football fans everywhere know exactly who Kadyn Proctor is. Coming out of high school, he was a five-star prospect. He started for the Alabama Crimson Tide at left tackle, a team that made it to the college football playoffs. Then he transferred in January from Alabama to Iowa and now announces his intention to transfer from Iowa to Alabama. And in my opinion, the wildest thing about all of this is the timing of it. Because just a few days ago, Nick Saban was on Capitol Hill advocating for anybody to do something about the game we all love, college football. Because yes, college football, in my opinion, is the best sport in the world. But there's no debating right now that college football is in a precarious position. The NCAA cannot act on anything because they're scared of judicial action. Right now, the NCAA's inaction is all about self-preservation, as crazy as that sounds. But because of that, you had Nick Saban going to Capitol Hill advocating those in Congress to do something about the current state of college football, how it's truly the wild, wild west. Well, what did Nick Saban get for his efforts? If you looked on social media, everybody was taking shots at the GOAT, saying now he's crying because he couldn't adapt. And listen, if not being able to adapt in your given job field is still being at the very tippy top of that job field, I think everybody in America would like to not be able to adapt. But that's neither here nor there. Nick Saban was someone who was still making college football playoff games. He was still pulling in number 1 or number 2 recruiting classes. Through all of these changes he couldn't adapt to. And through it all, my message was simple. People don't disagree with Nick Saban's message, because if you looked at the Twitter accounts who were bashing Nick Saban for what he said, they had shared those same sentiments, whether in likes, whether in replies, or whether in tweets. They had shared those same sentiments. No, it wasn't the message that people were mad at. It was the messenger. They couldn't stand that Nick Saban was once again right. They couldn't stand that the man who had dominated college football on the gridiron was now in a position to affect change for the entire game of college football, even if it was in a positive direction. They hated the messenger. But ladies and gentlemen, there's one thing we must acknowledge. The message was right. And now, ever since Kadyn Proctor has announced his intention to transfer back to Alabama, you see social media saying college football is cooked. Well, this is exactly the point Nick Saban was trying to get to. Kadyn Proctor went to Iowa from Alabama, had an NIL deal, and before ever playing a game is going to transfer and go back to Alabama. This is what Nick Saban was talking about. College football right now has little to no guardrails because, like I said, the NCAA is acting out of self-preservation. It just so happens that the NCAA's self-preservation is sitting on their hands. That way they don't end up back in court. Because if you've been around this channel, you've probably heard me talk about several of the court cases that are coming down the docket between now and 2026 that we need to keep an eye on. Cases that could shape the future of the sport we know and love. But as we continue to talk about that, those conversations will prevail. Right now, we need to talk about what this means for Alabama, having Kadyn Proctor return. And this is quite interesting, because whenever we looked at Alabama, if you were talking offensively, there was one major question you had. What are you going to do about the offensive line? This is an offensive line that over the previous 3 years has not been the powerful unit so many Alabama fans have come to expect. In fact, we did a video not too long ago looking at the previous 3 years, averaging it out, and what we found was that over the past 3 years, Alabama has averaged 99th in the nation in terms of sacks allowed. And when you think about the simple truths of the game of football, one of which being, if you win the line of scrimmage, you have a much better opportunity to win the game. It's incredible how much sustained success Alabama has had whenever their offensive line has been inconsistent at best. Heck, last year they were number 129 in the nation in terms of sacks allowed, and they took the national champions to overtime. It's kind of incredible to think about the level of success they've had through all of the inconsistencies. But when we look at the Alabama offensive line going into 2024, there were questions. Now, in fairness, whenever you were talking about the interior of Alabama's offensive line, that's where you needed to be excited. Parker Brailsford transferring in, being the highest graded returning center in all of college football, by the way, the number 2 graded center last year. That's a huge win coming from Washington to Alabama. You look at the guard positions, Tyler Booker, Jaden Roberts. I think every Alabama fan is over the moon with those 2 names. The major question was, what are you going to do at offensive tackle? And Kadyn Proctor can help answer one of those questions. Now, I already know. Before I even post this video, I'm going to get comments saying, but Kadyn Proctor really struggled as a true freshman. And listen, I don't disagree. However, I have made it known for quite a while now that I thought the entirety of Alabama's offensive line carried too much weight last year. In fact, when Coach Wolford and all these people kept saying it's bigger than the biggest NFL offensive line in terms of weight, that was a red flag to me. Because it's not like the NFL can't have the biggest offensive lines in all of football. They have access to the best talent, the best nutrition, the best sports scientists in the world. They don't do it for a reason. And Alabama fans last season, they got an up-close and personal view as to why they don't do that. In my opinion, the whole of Alabama's offensive line was a little bit too big. Kadyn Proctor was a true freshman. He had to learn in the fire. But if he can shed down 15 pounds, remain athletic, I think he could be a real answer for Alabama at the left tackle position. He has familiarity. He's played with Booker. He's played with Jalen Milroe. He knows the team, and more than that, the team has embraced him. He was just on spring break with them, and to me, that speaks volumes. So this is a situation we will no doubt continue to monitor. This is an interesting development, and one that could go a long ways to answer a major question for Alabama. But for answering a question for Alabama, it certainly poses a question about the future of college football and how many more situations like this we could see. And I've got to hear from all of you. Hop down to the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See you.